The ballroom at the Harrington Grand smelled like money. That's the only way I can describe it. That particular blend of fresh flowers that cost more per arrangement than I made in a week during my best years, leather upholstery polished to a mirror shine, and whatever cologne men wear when they've stopped looking at price tags. I stood at the entrance in my gray suit, the one I'd had tailored 15 years ago for my wife's funeral, the one my daughter-in-law had once called very classic, in a tone that meant the opposite. A young man with a gold name badge and a rehearsed smile materialized beside me. "Good evening, sir. May I have your name?" "Harold Briggs, father of the groom." He glanced at his tablet. His smile didn't waver, but something shifted behind his eyes. "Of course, Mr. Briggs. Right this way." He led me past the main tables, past the round tables draped in ivory linen with gold centerpieces, past the head table where my son would sit with his new wife, past the section where I'd seen my son's in-laws earlier, laughing loudly with champagne in hand. We kept walking, through a side corridor, past the kitchen entrance, to a smaller room off the main ballroom, 4 rectangular tables, simpler cloths, no centerpieces. The catering staff was setting up at the far end. "There must be a mistake," I said. "This is the overflow seating, Mr. Briggs. Complimentary of the family. I'm the father of the groom." "Yes, sir." The main room reached capacity for family seating. I turned and looked back through the corridor. I could see the main ballroom from where I stood. I could count the empty chairs. Before I could say another word, I heard footsteps and my son appeared at the corridor entrance. 34 years old, haircut fresh, rented tuxedo sitting slightly wrong on his shoulders the way rented things always do. I'd offered to buy him one. He'd said his wife had it handled. "Dad." His voice was quiet, urgent. "Come on. It's fine." "It's not fine, son. I can see empty seats in the main room from here. The seating chart is complicated. Vanessa spent months on it." He put his hand on my elbow. The same gesture, the same gentle pressure that meant, "Don't cause a scene." I'd felt that pressure before, at the engagement party, when I'd arrived in my truck, at the venue tour, when I'd asked how much things cost, at the rehearsal dinner, when I'd made a joke about remembering to eat because the food portions were decorative. "Your mother would have been at that head table," I said. Something moved across his face. He was quiet for a moment. "I know, Dad. I'm sorry. It's just Vanessa's family is very particular about these things. Her father donated to the venue's renovation fund. It's political. You understand. Political. You know what I mean." I did know. I'd been knowing for 3 years, since my son started dating Vanessa Caldwell, daughter of Richard Caldwell, who ran a commercial real estate firm in Atlanta and whose name was on 2 university buildings. I'd known from the first dinner her parents had hosted, where I'd been introduced as Michael's father, who works in transportation. I drove a school bus, 31 years, the same district. First bus out at 5:47 every morning. I knew every child's name on my route. I knew which ones needed to sit close to the front because of motion sickness, which ones were quiet on Mondays because something happened at home over the weekend, which ones lit up when you remembered their birthdays. That was transportation, I supposed. I let my son lead me to the overflow room. I sat down. An older woman I didn't recognize sat across from me and introduced herself as the florist's assistant. A man beside her said he was with the audiovisual company. We had a pleasant enough conversation. I ate the same food as everyone else. I watched the speeches through an open doorway, my son's face small and bright in the distance. When he danced his first dance with Vanessa, I watched her father cut in, and I watched my son step aside and smile. And I thought about the night 3 years ago when I'd gotten a phone call. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something." He'd sat at my kitchen table, same table he'd grown up at, same wobbly leg I'd been meaning to fix for a decade, and told me that Vanessa had found a house. Perfect location, good school district for eventually. Price was right, but the down payment was the problem. Her parents were helping, but it wasn't quite enough. I'd had $48,000 in a savings account. I'd been putting money away since my son was born. Not a fortune, Just what you can save when you drive a school bus and live carefully and don't take vacations and fix your own appliances and shop sales and tell yourself that someday your kid will need it more than you do. I'd written a check for $38,000. My son had cried. He said I didn't have to. I said that's what fathers do. Vanessa had sent a thank you card, a printed card with a handwritten signature, the kind you order from a stationery company. Richard Caldwell had never mentioned it. Not once, in all the dinners and events since, had that contribution been acknowledged. It had simply been absorbed into the down payment, smoothed over, made invisible, like me. The reception ended at midnight. I drove home in my truck, the one I'd bought used 4 years ago and kept running with my own hands because a mechanic charges more than I care to pay and because I know enough to do most of it myself. The highway was quiet. I turned off the radio and drove in the silence and thought. I wasn't angry. That's the part that surprised me. I'd expected to be angry and I wasn't. I was just tired. The particular exhaustion that comes from understanding something you'd been half knowing for years and not wanting to fully admit. My son loved me. I believed that. But he loved me the way you love a piece of furniture that doesn't match the new decor, with genuine affection and a strong preference that it stay in another room. The next morning was a Sunday. I made coffee at my kitchen table and I called my bank. Not immediately. First, I sat with my coffee for a while. I looked at the photograph on the refrigerator, the one of my son at 11 years old, standing in front of the bus after I'd let him pull the cord to open the doors. He'd been so proud of that. He'd told everyone at school his dad drove a bus. Not embarrassed, not apologetic. Just a kid who thought his dad had the best job in the world because from age 11, all jobs look impressive if the person who holds them is someone you love. I tried to remember when that had changed. Somewhere in college, I thought. Somewhere in the years he'd spent in rooms full of people whose fathers owned things other than operated them. I didn't blame him entirely. That kind of drift happens slowly. You don't notice it until you're sitting in a side room at your own son's wedding watching the speeches through a doorway. I called the bank. My financial advisor was a woman named Carol, who I'd worked with for 11 years. She answered on the second ring. Harold, what can I do for you on a Sunday morning? The money I've been setting aside for my son. The account we talked about last year, the one earmarked for if they needed help with the mortgage payment. The discretionary account. Yes, I want to restructure it. Keep the money where it is, but I want to take my son off as the designated beneficiary. I want to redirect it into a separate account I control. My name only. A pause. That's a significant change, Harold. Is everything okay? Everything is fine. I just want to be intentional about where this money goes. Of course. Should I also look at the recurring transfer you have set up? The monthly contribution? Stop that too. Another pause. Longer this time. I can have the paperwork ready by Tuesday. Thank you, Carol. I hung up and finished my coffee. The honeymoon was 2 weeks in Italy. I didn't hear from my son during that time, which was normal and right a man should be present on his honeymoon. I kept my routine. Early mornings, the bus route, the same turns I'd been making for 31 years. I started in the dark most mornings, headlights through neighborhoods still sleeping, and I thought there's something honest about a job that starts before sunrise. The world needs moving before it knows it needs moving. 6 weeks after the wedding, my son called. Hey, Dad. How are you? Good. How was the trip? Amazing. We'll have to show you pictures sometime. Sometime. Sure. A pause. He was working toward something. I'd known his voice long enough to hear the architecture of a conversation he'd been rehearsing. So, listen. Vanessa and I were reviewing finances. The mortgage, you know. With everything, the wedding was expensive, and we had some unexpected costs. Okay. We were kind of counting on that account you mentioned, the emergency fund situation, just as a buffer for the next few months while we get settled. What account? A longer pause. The one you mentioned you had money set aside for us, in case we needed help. I have money set aside, yes. For me. For my retirement. Dad. I have savings, son. That's mine. I don't recall making a commitment. You said at dinner last year, you said you were putting money away in case we needed it. In case you needed it. Present tense. Needs change. The silence on the line was different now. I don't understand. I know you don't. And I'm not sure. This is a conversation for the phone. Can you come for dinner this week? He came on a Thursday, without Vanessa, which told me he'd anticipated some version of this. He sat at my kitchen table, and I put food in front of him, and we talked about small things for a while. His work, the neighborhood, a funny story about the bus route. Then we sat with our coffee and I said what I needed to say. At your wedding reception, the father of the groom was seated in the overflow room with the catering contractors. He opened his mouth. I'm not asking you to explain the seating chart. I understand the seating chart. What I want you to understand is what that felt like. I kept my voice even. I'd practiced this. I have driven a school bus for 31 years. I put you through college. Not a fancy one, but a real one. And I paid for it. When your mother got sick, I worked double routes to cover the hospital bills. When you needed money for that down payment, I gave you $38,000 from savings I'd spent 20 years building. And at your wedding, I was placed in a room off the corridor because the father of the groom doesn't fit the image you're building. He was looking at the table. You introduced me to your wife's family as Michael's father, who works in transportation. That's a specific job with a specific name, and I'm not ashamed of it. I never said you should be ashamed. No. You just said it quietly enough that I could pretend I didn't hear it. He didn't answer. I stopped the transfers. I restructured the accounts. I'm not going to fund a life that doesn't have room for me in it. Not because I want to punish you. Because I've been paying to be invisible, and I'm done. He left that night without much resolution. We didn't fight. We didn't reconcile. He drove home and I sat at my table. And it was very quiet in the way that houses get quiet when you're past a certain age. And the people you love are somewhere else. And the only thing you can do is sit with what you've done and trust that it was right. 4 months went by. My daughter-in-law called once, about 6 weeks after the dinner. She was polite and controlled, and she said she thought there had been a misunderstanding and she hoped we could talk. I said I was happy to talk and suggested she come for coffee. She said she'd check her schedule and never called back. I wasn't surprised. I heard from my sister, who lived in the same city as my son, that things were tight, that Vanessa's father had pulled back some financial support over a business disagreement, that they were making adjustments. I didn't feel satisfied hearing that. I felt the particular sadness of watching someone learn a lesson they're not ready for. What broke the silence was not my son. It was his daughter. My granddaughter was 7 years old and her name was Lily, and she had been in my life as long as she'd been in the world because whatever distance had grown between my son and me, he had never interfered with my time with Lily. Every other Saturday, I picked her up and we spent the day together. We went to the park and the library and sometimes the auto shop where my friend Dennis let her sit in the cabs of the trucks and pretend to drive. She liked machines. She liked understanding how things worked. She once spent 40 minutes asking me how traffic lights knew when to change. The Saturday after Thanksgiving, I picked her up as usual. Something was different. She was quiet in a way she usually wasn't. Lily was a talker, a question asker, a girl who narrated her own thoughts out loud as they happened. This morning she sat in the passenger seat and looked out the window. You okay, sweetheart? I heard Mom and Dad fighting. I kept my eyes on the road. Sometimes grown-ups fight. It doesn't mean anything is wrong. They were fighting about you. I was quiet. Dad said it wasn't fair and Mom said you were being difficult and Dad said she didn't understand and then they saw me listening and they stopped. We drove for a bit. Grandpa, why don't you come to our house anymore? Your dad and I are working some things out. Did you have a fight? Not exactly. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements that take a while to figure out. She thought about this. My teacher says when you have a disagreement, you're supposed to say what you feel and listen to the other person and try to understand. That's good advice. Did you say what you feel? I did. Did Dad listen? I smiled at the road. He's still thinking about it. She seemed to accept this. We went to the park, and later we stopped at a diner for hot chocolate, and she told me about her class's Thanksgiving play and the boy who had tripped on his pilgrim hat during the performance. She was normal again. loose and funny and present. But when I brought her home, she held my hand in the driveway an extra moment. "I think Dad misses you," she said. "He looks at your picture sometimes." I drove home with that. He called the next morning. I let it ring once before I answered, which is not something I planned. "Dad, son," a long breath on the other end. I've been sitting here for an hour trying to figure out what to say. Say what's true. Another pause. Then, "I'm ashamed of what I did. Not your job. Not you. What I did." He stopped. Started again. "Vanessa and I have been going through something. Her father cut off the support we were depending on. We've had to look at everything. What we actually have. What we actually owe. It's been a hard few months. I'm sorry to hear that. I keep thinking about the seating at the wedding. I didn't plan it. I want you to know that. Vanessa's mother did the chart. But I knew. When I walked you to that room, I knew. And I didn't say anything. That's on me." His voice was rougher now. "You gave us $38,000, Dad. You drove a bus for 30 years to save that money. And I walked you to a side room like you were an inconvenience. I didn't say anything. I let it sit." Lily came home from Saturday and she told Vanessa that her grandpa was the most interesting person she knew because he understood how everything worked, and he told her about engines and traffic lights and how the highway systems were built. She said she wanted to be an engineer because of you. "And Vanessa," he stopped. Vanessa cried. "She asked me to tell her about you, the real version, not the one she thought she knew." "What did you tell her?" "I told her about the double routes when Mom was sick, about how you never once complained, about how every kid on your bus route knows you by name, and some of them are adults now and they still wave when they see your truck. I told her about the $38,000 and how you slid the check across the kitchen table and said, 'That's what fathers do,' and went back to your coffee." The line was quiet for a moment. "She wants to apologize. In person. She's not good at it. She didn't grow up in a family where people said sorry, but she wants to try. We both do. You know where I live," I said. They came on a Sunday. All three of them. My son, my daughter-in-law, and Lily, who ran up the front path and hugged me around the middle before I could open the door all the way. Vanessa was different in my house than she'd ever been in restaurants or event venues. Smaller, somehow. More careful. She sat at my kitchen table and she held her coffee mug with both hands and she said, "I owe you a real apology, and I've been rehearsing it all week, and now I can't remember any of it." "You don't need a script," I said. "I made you invisible. At the most important event of my husband's life, I made his father invisible. I told myself it was about logistics, seating charts, my family's expectations. None of that is the real reason." She looked at the table, then at me. "The real reason is that you didn't fit the picture I was building. And I'm not proud of that picture anymore." "What changed?" "My father's support dried up and suddenly we had to look at what we'd built. And when I looked at it honestly, I saw how much of it was performance. The house, the wedding, the whole way we'd been living. And then Lily came home talking about her grandfather who knows how everything works. And I realized the man I'd been hiding was the realest person in our family." My son reached across and put his hand over hers. "I also did the math," Vanessa said. And something in her tone shifted slightly, became more direct. "You gave us $38,000. My father gave us a number that sounded larger but came with conditions I didn't understand until those conditions were called in. Your $38,000 had no conditions. None. Just that's what fathers do. I didn't know how to receive that because I'd never seen it before." She looked up. "I'm sorry, Harold. I'm genuinely sorry. I looked at this woman, 10 years married to my son in everything but the last 6 months of paperwork, who had grown up in rooms where money meant control and love meant performance, who had built a life on appearances because appearances were the only currency she'd been taught. And I thought about how certain lessons only arrive when you've lost enough to see clearly. I accept that," I said. Lily had already found the cabinet where I kept the modeling kits, old habit of mine. Building small mechanical models, cars and planes, and once a miniature locomotive, and she was pulling one out, asking, could she help? After lunch, I said, we ate at the kitchen table, all 4 of us, and my son told me about the plan. They were selling the house. Not in panic, not in crisis, but deliberately. They'd found something smaller, 20 minutes from where they were, in a neighborhood that was real in the way their current neighborhood had never quite managed to be. Vanessa was going back to the graphic design work she'd done before they married, which she'd stopped because Richard Caldwell had suggested it didn't project the right image for where the family was headed. My son had taken on a project manager role that was less prestigious but steadier, and he'd discovered he liked it better. "We're done performing," my son said. I didn't realize how tired I was from it until we stopped. After lunch, Lily and I worked on the model kit at the kitchen table. A 1969 Mustang, the kind that had to be assembled in stages. She had careful hands and a precise focus that reminded me of my wife at that age, in the few photographs I had. My son washed the dishes without being asked. Vanessa sat nearby with her coffee and watched us and didn't say much. But it was the comfortable kind of quiet, the kind that means someone has put something down. "Grandpa," Lily said, not looking up from the chassis she was fitting together. "What did you build when you were my age?" "Radios mostly. Little transistor radios. You could order the kits through the mail. Did they work?" "Sometimes. When I did it right." "What happened when you did it wrong?" "Static. Or nothing." She thought about this. "Is that what happened with you and Dad? Static?" My son went quiet at the sink. "Something like that," I said. "But we figured out where the connection was loose." "And you fixed it?" "We're fixing it. Some repairs take time." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to the Mustang. The money was still in my accounts. Carol sent me the paperwork confirming the restructuring. I sat with it for a long time. The way you sit with something before you decide what it means. My son hadn't asked about it at the Sunday dinner, hadn't raised it on the phone, hadn't mentioned it in any of the conversations since. I noticed that. He'd come to my house and apologized and spent the day with his father without bringing up the money once, and that told me more than anything else he could have said. A few weeks later, I told him. We were in my garage. He'd come over to help me with something and stayed 3 hours because that's how garages work. You start on one thing and end up talking through several others. He was leaning on the workbench watching me, same way he used to at 11 years old. "The account is still there," I said. "The money's still in it." He looked at me. I didn't touch the principal. Redirected it into something I control. But it's there. It was always going to be there for you. That part doesn't change. What changed is the terms. "What are the terms?" "I'm not a condition setter. That's not me. But I need to be in the room. The real room. Not the overflow. I need to be your father in front of people, not your logistics background. I need to be known." He didn't hesitate. "You will be. I promise you. And I need to teach Lily how to change oil when she's older." He almost laughed. "She's already asking." "I know," she told me. I put the wrench down and looked at him. My son, who had his mother's jaw and my stubbornness, and 34 years of a life I'd had a part in building. He'd gotten lost for a while in a version of success that required him to smooth over where he came from. That happens. That's a thing the world does to people, particularly the ones who climbed. The question was never whether he'd gotten lost. The question was whether, when it mattered, he could find his way back. He had, slowly, imperfectly, pushed along by a 7-year-old who didn't understand why her grandfather wasn't allowed at the table. Not through argument or ultimatum, but through a child who hasn't yet learned to pretend that things are fine when they aren't. I thought about that side room at the Harrington Grand, the folding tables and the AV technician and the florist's assistant, and the plate of food I'd eaten while watching my son's first dance through a doorway. I thought about the moment I drove home in my truck and decided I was done subsidizing my own invisibility. I don't regret it. Not any of it. Not giving the money in the first place. Not stopping it. Not the 4 months of silence that felt like surgery. Some things have to be cut before they can heal cleanly. If I had kept writing checks and swallowing the overflow room and letting my son introduce me as a logistics professional to people whose good opinion we didn't actually need, we would have kept drifting. Further and further until we were strangers who exchanged birthday calls and not much else. The money I gave was never the point. Fathers give. That part comes naturally. The part I had to learn The part I was late to learn was that giving without requiring honesty is not generosity. It's just funding someone else's fiction. Lily knows what I do. She tells people her grandfather drives a bus and knows how engines work and can fix almost anything. She says it the way my son used to say it at 11 years old, with the uncomplicated pride of someone who hasn't been taught to sort jobs into categories of worthy and unworthy. I hope she keeps that. I suspect she will. Last Saturday, she sat beside me in the bus I'd arranged with the district for her to ride along. Supervised, the way I used to do with my son, and watched the route unfold through the wide windshield. The morning light on the neighborhoods, the familiar turns. She was quiet in the good way, taking it in. "Do you love this?" she asked. "Every morning," I said. "Even after 30 years? Especially after 30 years. She thought about that. "Grandpa, do you think I could drive a bus someday?" "You can drive anything you want, Lily. But first you have to be able to reach the pedals." She laughed. That pure, uncalculated laugh that children have before they learn to manage it. And I kept driving. Out through the neighborhood, still waking up, past the houses with their lights coming on, carrying us forward into the ordinary, honest morning. There's a particular kind of peace that comes from a life that matches itself, where what you say matches what you do, and what you do matches what you value, and you don't have to manage the gap between who you are and who you're pretending to be. I've had that peace for 31 years behind a steering wheel. For a while, I'd been in danger of trading it for a version of belonging that would have required me to sand myself down until I was unrecognizable. I didn't make that trade. My son knows now where he comes from, not just as a fact, but as something he's willing to say out loud to the people around him. His wife knows what kind of man I am. His daughter thinks I'm the most interesting person she knows, which I will take, completely without embarrassment, as one of the finest things I've ever been told. And the money I saved through 30 years of early mornings and careful living, it's still there, waiting for when they genuinely need it. Not for appearances, not for houses they can't afford or weddings designed to impress people whose respect was never worth having. For something real, for something that will still matter when the performance is over. I drove a school bus. I fixed my own truck. I raised a son on a bus driver's salary and sent him into the world with the tools he needed. And when the world started working on him, I held the line until he remembered where he came from. That's what fathers do. And it was enough. It had always been enough. The bus turned onto Ridgeway, same as every morning, and somewhere behind me, a light came on.